So up to this point, Feinberg has discussed this imaginary world of Nowheresville, a world where no individual has any rights whatsoever. And in doing so, he's at least initially brought up objections to two conceptions of rights that we've seen before. He's brought up objections, reasons not to understand rights in the way that Hobbes, for instance, understood them as liberties or freedoms to do something or to forbear from doing something. He thinks that we've got a perfectly comprehensible understanding of Nowheresville that includes them having liberties to do and to forbear without implying that they have any rights whatsoever. Now, he'll return to the notion of rights as liberties later when he responds to objections to his view. He's also tried to break this connection when embodied in the view that he calls the logical correlativity between rights and duties, this idea that every right gives rise to a corresponding duty, and every duty gives rise to a corresponding right. He wants to reject that notion. In fact, he tries to give us a way of imagining Nowheresville, where people have all sorts of duties to each other. They have quite a bit of beneficence and quite a bit of conscientiousness about performing their duties to each other, but they explicitly have no rights to one another and no rights themselves. So what does he think we can learn from contemplating Nowheresville? And what does he think it teaches us about the nature of rights and the centrality of rights in ethics? So he tells us the most conspicuous difference between Nowheresvillians and ourselves has something to do with the activity of claiming. Nowheresvillians, even when they are discriminated against invidiously or left without the things they need or otherwise badly treated, do not think to leap to their feet and make righteous demands against one another. They have no notion of rights, so they do not have a notion of what is their due, and hence they do not claim before they take. And it's this idea of engaging in the activity of claiming that Rachel wants to use to understand the notion of rights. And so we'll find Rachel will be in this camp that wants to try and understand rights in terms of claims. But his position is a little more nuanced than simply equating rights and claims, as we'll see. So now he wants to turn his attention to the notion of claims, and he acknowledges that rights and claims are so closely related to each other that he thinks it's difficult to try and define one in terms of the other without engaging in some sort of circularity. Nevertheless, he thinks that rights and claims can be separated conceptually so that we can understand claims as distinct from rights and rights as resulting through claiming. In order to do this, he wants to distinguish three uses or senses of the notion of claim in English. And he wants to use those different notions of claim to help us understand rights. And so he's going to distinguish these three senses of claiming. The first sense is making a claim to something, and he calls this performative claiming. So performative claiming for him involves active claiming. It's an act whereby one makes a claim and does so in a way that attempts to justify one's claim or show that it's valid. The second sense of claiming is also an active sense of claiming. It's claiming that, or propositional claiming. And propositional claiming is also active claiming because one is actively asserting one's claim or actively claiming a right. But one isn't engaging in offering of evidence or following procedures. Instead, one is simply making a statement, an insistence that one has a right or one's claim is valid without offering up evidence or engaging in any procedures that might verify or validate that claim. And finally, the third sense is what he calls the nominative sense. It's the sense of claim when we say we have a claim. So the nominative sense generally is the sense of a term in which it's the subject of a sentence. And so it's a noun sense. And that's what Rachel's has in mind when he talks about the nominative sense of claiming. It's this idea that people have claims, like you would have an orange. So let's look at these three senses a little more carefully as Feinberg wants to understand them. So performative claiming, in Feinberg's mind, consists in taking action, especially actions like providing evidence, following procedures, adhering to rules, and such activities that are intended to secure something that is due to one, or taking action to initially establish a right to something. And so he considers everyday activities like cashing a check, sending a bill, filing a claim, and so on, all as instances of performative claiming. And these more mundane cases are instances of performative claiming, but ratifying civil rights acts or engaging in civil protest to secure rights are also instances of performative claiming. The next sense that he wants to talk about is what he calls propositional claiming. Propositional claiming consists in asserting that one has a claim to something without providing any evidence or following any procedures or acting in any way to attempt to validate or secure one's claim. Well, he tells readers that to claim, in this propositional sense, that one has rights is to make an assertion that one has them, and to make it in such a manner as to demand or insist that they be recognized. This doesn't involve actually taking actions to establish that right. It's merely the statement of the right, together with an insistence that it be recognized. So, in Feinberg's mind, propositional claiming doesn't have any legal consequences. But that doesn't mean that it's trivial or unimportant or unnecessary. Propositional claiming will be integral to Feinberg's notion of rights, because we need to be able to make propositional claims as well as to make performative claims in order to establish valid claims, and hence ultimately for Feinberg to have rights. Moreover, inappropriate cases of claiming, he thinks, have morally blameworthy properties associated with them. So outside of appropriate circumstances, for example, propositional claiming, he thinks, is boorish. And failing to claim in appropriate circumstances is spiritless or foolish. So propositional claiming isn't mere statements. It serves an important role in his mind, and it can be morally praiseworthy, morally blameworthy, or morally neutral. Finally, we have the nominative sense of claiming, and this corresponds to the notion of having a claim. The nominative sense of claims consists in the claim being the subject of a sentence. And that corresponds with the idea that the claim is somehow a noun, an object that we have. And so he says the nominative sense of claims consists in being in a position to claim, to make a claim, or to claim that. However, he wants to suggest that thinking of claims as things that are possessed by rights holders propagates a confusion. Now, in his reading, having a claim doesn't involve possession of a thing, an object. It's not something that we have or we go to the store and buy. Rather, having a claim involves being in a position to make a minimally plausible case that one, in fact, validly or legitimately has a claim to that. In the case of rights, to make a minimally plausible case for our having a right. Thus, to have a right, in contrast to merely having a claim for Feinberg, is going to consist in being in a position to show that one's claim, in the propositional and performative sense, is in fact valid. That is, to be able to make this claim in a way that demonstrates it to be valid and to insist upon its validity.